Chase and Stalk Through the Woods at Night by Blonde Everness 91. I am a 24-year-old female from the UK. Now, despite a few creepy instances as a child, there has only ever been one time in my adult life that I truly felt primal fear. I live in a village in the middle of the English countryside. To paint an accurate picture of its size, it has a population of 4,000, but feels more like 1,000 due to its spread out nature and being surrounded on all sides by lots of fields, farms and woods that eventually connects onto a pretty famous forest. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and because of this it's notoriously bad for phone connection and other types of connection like internet. Having lived there all my life, I know the place like the back of my hand. I literally know where all the public footpaths are, through the fields and whatever else, and how each of these connect, which are like shortcuts. Now, I've went on walks through this with my parents and on my own later as an adult. Nothing bad ever happened. It felt safe here. And my story takes place during the summer of last year, in July, after I moved back from university. I had yet to get a job and smoked a lot, a habit my parents despised and that I tried to keep hidden from them by going for evening walks. So anyway, as per usual on this day, both my parents got home at 5 PM. We had dinner but chatted for a while longer than usual, as my mum had quite a hectic day and was actually telling me all about it. Because of this, I ended up heading out for my walk an hour later than I planned to, at around 7 PM. As it was the summer, the sun was still shining, so honestly, I didn't really notice that it was gonna start to get dark when I went out. So the woodlands closest to my house is about 5 minutes away, and you enter through a gate into a farmer's field. You can see across the open area for quite a long way until the first set of small woods obstructs your view. That's where I was heading, as I knew this track takes under 2 hours and leads back onto the same path that I was now standing on. That was more than enough time for me to smoke all of the joints in my pocket and for the smell to leave my clothes, so I thought. Now, this area is also very popular for dog walkers, so it's not unusual to see other people while you're about, and this is a village where that everybody knows each other, so tends to say hello. So I lit my first joint and started walking. I'm just in my own world for a while, until I was less than 100 feet before the entrance to the woods. I see an elderly man coming out of them throwing a ball for his collie dog. I finished my joint and subbed it out. As I got closer, I recognised it was John, who lived on the road next to mine and knew my grandpa. We stopped and said hello as I stroked his dog, Max. It's while talking to him that I see another man emerging from the woods. He has no dog, but has a bright green jacket. He's very tall and is easily 10 years older than me. Me and John just chat away for another minute or so and say goodbye, but he then warns me not to stay out here too long as it's going to start getting really dark. It was true that the sky was bright pink and orange. The sun was indeed beginning to set. So I then continued on my way down the path towards the man. When we nearly passed each other, I look up to make brief eye contact. I smile and say hello, like everyone does, even if you don't recognise the person. And my eyes instantly met his. He was already looking at me, his dark eyes locked on mine. He wasn't smiling. I didn't know him, and I knew that something was just wrong. It was in his eyes. I then just swallowed my politeness and looked towards the ground as we passed. I had lived in my uni city the past couple of years, so I knew a red flag when I saw one. I then quickened up the pace a little and before entering the woods, slyly looked back. This guy was still walking in the same direction following John. I felt relieved after this and just laughed a little bit, and I thought it was maybe the weed making me paranoid while I lit up another joint and started walking into the woods. It takes about 30 minutes to follow the path through the woods to the end. The pathway exit opened into another field that led to another set of woods. The sky was now violet. I hadn't really noticed how fast it was dimming because of the tree cover. So, I was near the entrance to the second set of woods when I felt it. Fear. Complete, crippling, absolute fear worked its way like electric through every single layer of my flesh. I had never felt anything like it before or since, but I knew what it was and I whipped around. Then I saw him, standing at the exit of the first set of woods, the man. I could still make out his green jacket in the fading lights. He's obviously doubling back, and very quickly too. I had looked back several times while in those trees and hadn't seen him there whatsoever. For a second, I froze as he did. He knew that I'd seen him. To sprint the distance between us probably would have taken him about 5 minutes. He's obviously in very good shape. I threw the piff and started bolting it into the woods, the only way that I could go. I didn't dare look behind me. I sprinted for a couple of minutes before taking a sharp left turn onto the path into the trees. I really hoped that maybe this would throw him off, but I literally couldn't see a thing. The light was already darkening and the trees made it 100 times worse, especially as I was now in the thick of them, their branches catching on my clothes like fingers, whipping and scratching my bare leg as they bled badly. I ran and ran, my lungs protesting in pain, hating me for smoking so much, while my heart was throwing itself against my ribcage trying to escape. I couldn't think anymore. I threw myself on the ground behind a particularly thick trunk, my back against it, knees to my chest and hands thrown over my mouth to try and stop my breathing being too apparent, desperately trying to pump air into my lungs for the next sprint. I listened for the first time. A few seconds passed silently. Then I hear him. Heavy footfall snapping twigs behind me about 20 feet to my left. I don't dare look in case he sees me. I have my phone, but I know I have little chance of signal being where I was. The thing is though, he would have either seen me because of the light coming from my phone, or probably would have heard me talking. I'm not ashamed to say at this point I started to cry, the tears falling silently down my cheeks. "What the hell?" I hear in a very deep voice. "Where are you? I know where you are. I saw you." I have to clasp both hands across my mouth to stop my scream from escaping. I can hear him moving around. I panic and I find enough courage to slowly peek from behind the tree. He was now about 10 feet behind me, maybe less than 20 feet to the left, and very close to where I was. I moved back and my eyes searched around me. I pick up a pretty heavy rock. I carefully check on him again. His back is still turned, but he's searching through the trees, hunched down lower to the ground now. I make a snap decision and with everything I had, I threw the rock behind me to the right. It clattered through the branches and the trees and made one hell of a noise. I watch him immediately bolt in its direction, laughing. He's laughing at me. I then pause a little, hearing his footsteps getting quieter, until I thought that I wouldn't be so visible to him if I moved and threw myself forward. So I ran, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, but I was also aware that I was getting further and further away from home simultaneously. I knew there had to be a stream somewhere close. If I found the stream, I can follow it to the borders of the land that run parallel to some of the footpaths. So I ran, then ran, and eventually I managed to reach the trees in the clearing, and I can just make out another field through them on the other side. I thank God and push myself a little bit further till I'm almost out of the trees, and the ground disappears from below my feet. I then go head over shoulders down the embankment. I crash into the water below, my mouth open and lungs filling with muddy water. As I splutter it out, I feel both relieved to have found this stream and terrified that he's heard me. My phone is also now ruined. I slowly make my way downstream as quietly as possible, listening out the whole time as that I'm running parallel to the woods, looking up periodically just in case. After a while with this, maybe half an hour, I notice the trees begin to thin out and realise this is the edge of the woods where I would have been exiting and where the pathway connected to the original starting place. If I ran home, I could get there in less than 20 minutes. So, as quiet as I could, I dragged myself on my stomach back up on to the embankment, military style, wanting to stay as low as possible. I peeked over the top. I could just make out the opening of the woods exit path about 50 meters away. I sat and scanned the forest line for a couple of minutes, my eyes trying to make out even the slightest movement, trying to figure out if anything was there, but it was pitch black. I could see nothing. I couldn't hear anything either. I pushed myself up and sprinted as fast as I possibly could to the field onto the pathway. I knew the gate I'd entered through was in the adjoining field. It really wasn't that far. I was so happy. "You stupid girl." I heard this screeching from across the field. I swear my legs nearly gave out then and there. He'd been waiting for me the entire time. I turned my head and saw him sprinting out of the woods at full pelt. I screamed and pushed myself further, tears coating my face. All I could do is run. I crossed into the main field now and I could see the moonlight shining off the metal gate. My house was just about 5 minutes away after that. I had never focused on anything as much as that gate before. He was faster than me, and actually a lot faster than I had thought. He was getting closer, screaming at me the whole time about how he was gonna slit my throat. I ran and ran, pushing myself up and over the gate and ran up the road. I dared to look back as I made my turning onto my road. As I did though, he was still following me. I raced up the driveway and threw myself through the door, running into the living room, crying and screaming hysterically at this point, pointing behind me at the door. My dad ran outside and my mum grabbed a hold of me as I collapsed shaking. As it turns out, my parents had already called the police, as I said I was going out for an hour at 7 or so, and now it was past 12 AM. I hadn't answered when they had called my phone, and it was very unlike me to do that. We called the police again to explain, so they came and I gave a full statement. Both of my parents and the police were literally horrified. Nothing like this ever happens here. There hadn't been a report of anything near this for literally 100 years. But one look at me and it was obvious I was telling the truth to them. I was covered head to toe in cuts and bruises, soaking wet and covered in mud and blood. I won't go into how this experience changed me. It's honestly depressing, but I will say that the thing that scares me most is the fact that they never even had a suspect, despite him following me so closely, and how that my dad ran outside and should have easily been able to find him. That guy is still out there. Who knows what he's really capable of? The Calling from the Woods by Lance Idyllics. My mum grew up in a small town and she had quite a few creepy encounters as a teen in the late 1970s. One night, her mum ordered her that she had to go and feed the cats who lived in the outside sauna during the winter. She reluctantly went outside since it was such a bitterly cold winter that year. She got about halfway to the sauna when she heard a man calling "help me" from the woods nearby. She got spooked and ran back home to the house and tried to tell her mum that there was somebody outside yelling for help. Her mum told her that it was just the wind and that she needed to go back outside to feed the cats. She went back out and got about halfway to the sauna when she heard a man calling for her to help him. She was now positive that it wasn't the wind, and this time made her mum come outside to listen, and she heard the guy calling help from the woods. She called her husband to go in the woods and search and see what it was, since she didn't think it was a good idea for her daughter and herself to go out looking for him. My mum's dad went out to the woods to see who was in need of assistance and was stunned to find a man in a long winter coat standing near the woods by the house. When the man in the coat saw my grandpa, he ran towards the dirt road and got into a car and sped off. Close Encounter in the Woods by Stylopod. I grew up in a town in a relatively rural part of England. Once upon a time, the whole area had been an ancient woodland. By the time I grew up there, the urban sprawl meant that only a few pockets of woodland remained, and they are entirely surrounded by estates. I hated walking through those woods. I hated it. The quickest way to get anywhere from the street I grew up on was to take a footpath that ran from one end of the street and around the back of the houses, and then through maybe a quarter of a mile wide patch of woodland before you reached the heart of the town. It only took a few minutes if you took the most direct path through, but my heart would be racing the entire time. I had to walk through there to get to school actually, or to go to the shops where my mum sent me to get groceries. Knowing that, my older brothers would tell me that the woods were haunted by the ghosts of people who had been hung at the gallows that once stood there. When I was a teenager, I became scared of the woods for an entirely different reason. During the winter months when it was already dark and when I walked home from school, older kids would sometimes lurk amongst the trees to try and scare the life out of the smaller kids and demand what little money they had, or sometimes even take their cell phones. But now I'm an adult, so when I visited my mum in my hometown last winter, the woods were no longer holding any fear to me. It had snowed properly for the first time in years, and my mum, in typical mum fashion, immediately informed her elderly neighbour that her daughter was visiting and would happily go and take her dog out for a walk so that she didn't have to risk walking on the icy pavements. So the morning that I arrived, I found myself walking down that footpath into the woods with a fat old Labrador in tow. It doesn't often snow in the city I live in now, so I decided to take a recent purchase, a good DSLR camera, out with me to get some photos of the scenery. The fat old dog and I wandered around the woods for about 20 minutes or so, with the dog hobbling around in the snow and occasionally making a half-hearted attempt to catch some of the pigeons that were around. All the while I snapped photographs of the snow-laden branches and the stark black and white landscape. Now this was quite early on a Sunday morning, so nobody else was around, and there were very few other footpaths in the snow. I was quite enjoying the walk, but I started to get a bit cold and didn't want to exhaust the neighbour's dog too, so I decided it was about time to head back, when I then heard something moving through the woods towards us. Someone was heading rapidly down the main path. Me and the dog were currently hidden out of sight on a side path. Now I'm not sure why I had this thought, but it instantly occurred to me that I needed to hide. I did so without really thinking. I hesitated for a moment, and then, mind full of memories of being accosted by hooded teenagers and robbed of my very first brick phone, I stepped off the path and hid amongst the bushes and trees. The lens of my camera the whole time was worth about the same as a month's rent, and I guess I was worried about somebody trying to rob that off me, and they maybe thought I was an easy target. The dog hesitated for a moment as I tugged at his lead, but he eventually followed me into the bushes just in time. I crouched down with a hand on his head, willing him to be still and quiet, as a person came into view on the path just a few feet away. I didn't really get a good look at them, but I saw that it was a man. He was very tall and wearing a dark jacket and a red baseball cap and moving in a hurry. Thankfully, the dog remained quiet and then the man left. When the man was then out of sight, the dog and I stepped back onto the path and I decided to take a few more pictures before we left. As we were heading back, the silence was broken by the loud drone of a helicopter overhead. I couldn't see it clearly until we were on the footpath behind the houses and out from under the trees, but once I was there, I could see that it was a police helicopter circling over the woods. I returned the fat old dog to my mum's neighbour without any incident, and I completely forgot about the helicopter until a little later when my mum switched on her radio in her kitchen and we could listen to some music while we ate lunch. It was a local radio station, and their top story was that the police were hunting a man who had beaten somebody practically to death on a secluded footpath earlier that morning. The path they described linked the woods that I had been walking into the centre of town. The suspect was described as being tall, wearing a dark jacket and a red hat. The Woods Have Lights by Mr. Wonderbread. These are getting better. To preface this, I want to say last year that I spent about 32 days in the woods either scouting, hunting or fishing. The year before that, I spent about 22 days. This doesn't include my regular hunts and camping adventures, which in the past 3 years adds up to over 100 days in the woods. I've been hunting since I was 9 and have spent a lot of time outdoors in various different parts of the US and in Canada. I haven't ever seen or heard a lot of strange things, but this one really takes a cake. I was in Cohutta in the North Georgia wilderness for 7 days scouting for bears, wild hogs, deers and prepping for a hunting trip later that year. I had hiked in about 10 miles and then went off the trail for another 3 or 5 miles. Basically, I was in the middle of nowhere. Since I was alone, I was using a hammock that was built with a large bug net and I had a rain fly over it. I spent about 3 days halfway up a mountain just looking for a good place to hunt. I saw 3 or 4 good sized bears and about 10 hogs and came across a good sized deer. On the 4th day, I was going to go down to a small stream that I had marked on my GPS and then reset up camp, restock on water and prepare for the 2-day hike. I could have gone faster, but I wanted to be able to look out for any signs of animals along the way. As I was approaching this small stream, I noticed a tent which I was excited to see, as I had been completely alone for a few days and it's always nice to run into another hiker. Generally, us wilderness folk are pretty down to earth. As I got closer to the tent, I noticed that there was a small pack on the ground just outside of it. I just figured that the person couldn't have been that far from where I was. So I set up my camp about 30 yards away, and with about 4 hours of daylight left, I started cooking some dinner. 2 hours later, I was starting to wonder where this person was, given that in the wilderness, it was a 1+ day hike out and there wasn't really much you could do, but I did hike around that site though, making a circle as I went out to look out for any signs of struggle in case of a bear attack, or maybe they had an injury. I got about a 1/4 of a mile from the campsite walking a circle. I literally couldn't see anything. As night came, no one showed up. I started a fire in the hopes that whoever this person was would be able to see where they set up and have some light. Fires burn really bright and are very easy to see from literally miles away. After eating, searching, and hoping that the person was going to make it back, I called it a night. I had a small flask with me, so I took a couple of sips of whiskey and jumped into my hammock with my pistol and attempted to go to sleep. I sleep pretty hard, real hard, regardless of where I am. It annoys my friends because I always seem to fall asleep and stay asleep, regardless of where in the world we are. But this night, something was different. I felt like something was off, but I figured it was just me worrying about this person who, by all accounts, was completely missing. So for the first time in my life, I woke up to the sound of what I thought was footsteps, but not in the sense of footsteps on leaves, but what sounded to be a very heavy-footed person who was making their way around an old wooden floor. It was extremely loud. I got my gun, grabbed my headlamp. I then waited to see if it would all stop. Right at that moment, it did. Then I saw something that scared the life out of me. On my rain flyer, the gleam of a flashlight. Faint, but there. I shouted hello, and right when I did, it sounded like 10 people suddenly running away from me in every direction. I dropped out of my hammock and fell straight onto the ground, frantically turning on my headlamp, shining it in all directions around me. But I didn't see anything. My heart was racing pretty bad, but I thought it might have just been the reflection of the moonlight onto my rain flyer. Yeah, that was it. And those footsteps were probably just armadillos or something. Even though their eyes shine, they're pretty easy to spot. Problem was, there was no moonlight. I'd never seen an armadillo above 2,000 feet. The weird thing is that the campsite that I was set up by was completely gone. The fire had also went out too, but it was put out by water. This was apparent because there wasn't any coal under it. I thought for sure it was about 4 AM, but I could have only been asleep for about an hour. At this point, I wanted to leave, but the thing is, hiking at night is a really bad idea. So I grabbed my flask, took a swig of whiskey, removed my rainfly so I could see out of my hammock and around the area that I was in, and then tried my hardest to go back to sleep. I was laying down when I saw some light hit the trees above me. It was clear it was coming from downstream, so I got out of my hammock and started yelling, "Hey, do any of you need help?" I got no response. I saw whatever was putting out the light, and it spun around and started heading downstream, really fast. At this point, my body had pumped through more adrenaline than it had before, and I was exhausted from all of this. I was then finally able to fall asleep and woke up again at about 7 AM. When I did, I noticed that my water filter I'd left out was missing. It's a gravity filter, so it hangs from a tree while filtering down water into my main bladder that I put into my backpack, and my water bladder looked like it was cut down the middle with a knife. They also cut down my bear bag, which had food in it, and took some. The creepiest part of all of this is that they went through my bag, which was under my hammock while I was sleeping. I checked the bear bag before I went to sleep the second time, and it was still there, hanging, and my bag under my hammock hadn't been touched. I then packed all of my stuff and just hightailed out of there, keeping my pistol close to me, moving as fast as possible. I ended up making the hike back in under 15 hours. I hiked the trail part at night because I wasn't about to spend another night out there. The weirdest thing is, I didn't see anybody on my hike back, and the only car that I saw on the way back was mine parked up. No one else's. There was no trace of any other life being human apart from my own. Family in the Woods by Zombie Status Update. My dad has had many jobs throughout his life, and in the 70s he was a pig farmer. He would raise pigs and sell them by the pound at auction, then he would deliver them to the buyer. Well, one time he was delivering a load of pigs to a buyer way up in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas, and one of the pigs got away. The pig ran into some woods next to the property, and my dad finished unloading the rest of the pigs before eventually going off to find the one that got away. It took him a while to find the pig, and my dad says that, honestly, he wished he hadn't. When he found the pig, it was dead with an arrow sticking out of its side. Just before my dad walked up to the pig's body to see what had actually shot it, he heard two men coming from deeper in the woods, whooping and hollering. My dad ducked behind a tree just as two really gnarly looking guys came running up to the pig. They were both wearing overalls with nothing else on. Apparently one of the guys just looked really mean and crazy, and the other guy just looked really old and skinny. The two men picked up my dad's pig and sliced it open, and then the two men dragged it off and my dad followed them. The two men walked up to a small ramshack that had 4 people sitting on the front porch. As the men reached the house, a woman comes out with a boy, and they then just go and feast right there on the pig. My dad said that almost every single one of them had a physical deformity.